All right, so I think we're going to get started. Thank you so much for coming. As many of you know, I'm Carlos Díaz-Rosillo. I'm the founding director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the first event of the 2025-2026 academic year. We're launching the new cohort of Senior Leadership Fellows, which, as you know, is our center's flagship program. It's a program that brings to the center every semester 5 public servants, people who have served at the highest levels of government, who are going to share with you their experiences over the next few weeks in not-for-credit courses, which means that if you're there, it's because you want to learn, not because you get a credit. And so this event is the first public event in which we introduce them. We have a conversation about a couple of interesting topics, and then we're going to turn it over to you so you can ask whatever questions you want to ask. As many of you know, the center is a fairly young center. We were created a little over 40 years ago by the government of the state of Florida to promote a better understanding of issues at the intersection of the private sector and the public sector, to make sure that we inspire you to become public servants and come up with policies that promote the free market system, that promote democracy and all those good things. We do 4 very different types of things altogether. Number 1, of course, education. We do events like this one. The Senior Leadership Fellows will be teaching, as I mentioned, over the next few weeks. And we just launched a couple of weeks ago our Bachelor of Science in Business and Government Leadership. And we are about to launch our Master of Science in Business and Government Leadership, which is sort of a combination between an MBA and an MPA, all in 1 year. And we're thinking of doing other exciting academic programs. So education's 1. And we also do executive education throughout the world, where we take some of these amazing, talented public servants and many others to teach for 2 or 3 days across the globe. Second, research. We have a pretty robust research program where we do serious, thoughtful publications. This Friday, in a couple of days, we're going to launch the new edition of our annual Index of Bureaucracy, which is a study that looks at the bureaucratic burdens that governments in almost 24 countries in Latin America and in Europe, the obstacles that they put for the creation and the establishment and coming up at the termination of small businesses. And now for the first time, we're doing medium-sized businesses. We do an index of risk assessment that looks at the economic, political, social and international risk of investing in different countries, and many, many others. Third, public events. Events just like this one. Events where you can ask questions, where you can meet amazing leaders, not just academics, but people who've actually worked in government and business leaders. Anywhere from a small roundtable discussion to events that bring over 1,000 people to have these discussions. And fourth, we're beginning to set up an operation where we're going to hopefully serve as consultants to public servants. So if a mayor, if a governor, if a president has a public policy issue, they can come to us. We'll collect the data. We'll do the analysis. Of course, the public servant makes the decision, but hopefully we'll give the information necessary to make a more informed decision. So in a nutshell, that's what we do, and we're very excited to be welcoming this amazing group of 5 public servants. Sara couldn't be here with us, so she's zooming in from Washington, but she'll be here teaching her classes in a couple of weeks. Let me just spend a minute introducing the fellows, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin with a question for all of them, same question, and then I'm going to ask a couple of individual questions, and then I'll turn it over to you so you can ask whatever you want. So I'm going to begin on my left, to your right, with President Felipe Calderón, who, as you know, served as President of Mexico from 2006 until 2012. During his tenure, he led efforts to promote economic growth, strengthen the rule of law, and increase investment in infrastructure, education, and competitiveness. President Calderón held different positions before becoming president. For example, he was the president of his party, Partido de Acción Nacional, PAN. He was a deputy, a member of Congress, Director General of the National Works and Public Services Bank, and Secretary of Energy before running for president in 2006. He has chaired both the G20 Leaders Summit, which, as you know, the next G20 will be right here in Miami next year, and the UN COP16 Climate Conference. And today he serves as honorary chairman of the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate. He's an internationally recognized public speaker. He has been named Statesman of the Year and Champion of the Earth. And he's a leading voice on sustainable development and global leadership. He'll be here for the next month or so, teaching classes, which he'll talk about. He's teaching twice a week, and he'll talk about his classes. So, Mr. President, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you all.
From Mexico, we go to Uruguay.
Thank you. Thank you.
From Mexico, we go to Uruguay, where our next fellow has dedicated his career to defending democracy and human rights across the Western Hemisphere. Luis Almagro just concluded a couple of months ago his decade-long service as Secretary General of the Organization of American States, the OAS, where he worked to strengthen democracy, human rights, and regional cooperation throughout the Americas. His distinguished career also includes serving as Uruguay's foreign minister, ambassador to China, and senator. Today, he continues this mission as director of the Observatory for Democracy at the Center for Studies for Latin America Institute, advancing democratic governance throughout Latin America. And he's flying in from Uruguay every week to be teaching, so he has the longest commute of anybody. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for being here. From Uruguay, we go to the Dominican Republic, where we have somebody who is at the forefront of modernizing industry and commerce. And before I introduce the minister, a few semesters ago, 2 years ago, we began this new tradition of having not only former government officials, but current government officials. And so this is not the former minister, this is the current Minister of Industry, Commerce, and Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises in the Dominican Republic, and has been so since 2020. With more than 3 decades in politics, he has modernized industrial policy, fostered innovation, and expanded opportunities for investment. A 4-term deputy for the National District, a member of Congress, he has long championed the country's economic and social development. He's also an academic. He's the founder of the Center for Public Policy Analysis, CAP, and is the author of 5 books, including his most recent on national transformation and policy return. And those of us who know him are really hoping that one day he'll run for president. So thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here. And now we go from the Caribbean all the way to Europe, where our next fellow has shaped defense and security policy at the highest levels. Jan is currently the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Czech Embassy in Washington, D.C. He's a foreign policy expert, and before he was a Deputy Defense Minister of the Czech Republic. He has played a pivotal role in transatlantic security and crisis response, including the Kabul evacuation, the COVID-19 pandemic, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. With more than 2 decades of experience, Jan has held senior roles in NATO, and as I mentioned, he served as the Deputy Defense Minister of the Czech Republic. Thank you, Jan, for being here.
Thank you, Carlos.
Now, from the United States, we have Sara Armstrong, who's currently the Vice President and Managing Director at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where she oversees relationships with state and local chambers and national trade associations across the 50 states. She brings nearly 30 years of leadership experience across the White House, the Republican National Committee, and national campaigns. From serving as Special Assistant to President George W. Bush, to Deputy Chief of Staff to First Lady Laura Bush, she has built a distinguished career at the intersection of public service, politics, and business leadership. And she's, as I mentioned, joining us from Zoom from Washington, D.C., but she'll be here for all of our classes. Thank you, Sara.
Thank you, Carlos. Appreciate it.
All right, so let me ask a question to all of you, and I'll begin with President Calderón, and then we can take sides. There's no secret that President Trump has really shaped international affairs, has really shaped the way we look at trade, the way we look at the role of the United States in the world. From your perspective, as a Mexican citizen, as a former president of Mexico, what are your thoughts on President Trump's first few months in office?
From our side, and specifically that what I can perceive in Mexico is mixed feelings regarding that. In one sense, there is a feeling of fear, of course, a feeling of anger as well, and also for people, a feeling of hope related with different events. Hope in particular because the arriving of the new government imply a hope that there should be action. No, I cannot say more action, just action against organized crime and narco traffic in Mexico, because in the last previous 6 years, the task was completely abandoned, following a strategy that was an incredible failure. So the strategy of abrazos, no balazos, hugs, no bullets.
Didn't go so well.
Absolutely bad. So now that change create a sense of hope. Fears related with what has been perceived since like 10 years ago, like a aggressive or sometimes despective narrative against Mexicans in general. That part has improved, by the way. But at the same time, my own beliefs related with that is public policy, mainly the public policy related with trade and tariffs, regardless the opinion that anyone could have about that. And actually, Adam Smith will say a lot regarding the free markets and tariffs. But anyway, that's a different issue. I hope we can address that later on this month. That's going to hurt Mexico very, very much. Very, very much. And with a lot of implications, in my understanding. First, it's not a secret that Mexico became a powerful manufacturing country. When I took office, for instance, Mexico was this like a 9th largest exporter of vehicles in the world. When I left office, we were the 6th, and in some moment, the 3rd largest exporter of vehicles in the world, thanks to NAFTA, thanks to free trade, of course, thanks to the American, the American market. However, that was a good news for everyone because that's allow us to reduce, even prevent, and even reverse, for instance, migration. By tradition, Mexican workers used to be, in net terms, were traveling to the United States as migrants. But by the year 2010, according with these trends in this boom in manufacturing in Mexico, immigration went to 0 in net terms, meaning, and by 2012, immigration was negative, implies that there were more Mexican workers going back to Mexico than the other way around. So that was win-win situation, I believe. What is going to happen now if things continue like this, Mexico applying or the US applying tariffs to Mexico, 25% automotive industry, 50% steels, cement, other 25% related with the fentanyl and things like that. That implies that Mexico could be frozen in terms of economic growth. Actually, this year, it is expected that the economic growth in Mexico will be 0, if not negative. What is going to happen? Actually, and there is some things to fix.
For instance, was it during your terms? What was it? Growth when you were?
The average, well, we had the crisis in 2009, and the average finally was like a 1.5%. But in the last 3 years after the crisis, the average in my government was 4% a year on average. With the big recession in 2009 was so painful for us. However, I will speak, by the way, one of my classes is going to be about the recession in 2009 and the pandemic H1N1, which actually the outbreak was exactly in Mexico, and all of things that are going to be very, very interesting. I will talk about, I will address my class by cases, study cases. It's going to be quite interesting. But I'm coming back to that. So and I conclude with this. It's going to be easier and cheaper to export a car from Japan and North Korea all the way to the United States than for Mexico. Or a European car exporting that from Germany, for instance, with a tariff of 15%, than from Mexico, 15%, 25%. So that will imply, I believe, a very hard hit in the Mexican economy, an increase in immigration of Mexican workers, and the problems in general. Nevertheless,
So let me ask you a follow-up. If you were given advice, so there's no question that the U.S.-Mexican relationship is extremely important to both countries. Mexico is the U.S.'s #1 trading partner. If you were given advice to the Trump administration for how to manage that relationship with our #1 trading partner, what would you say?
I need to explore. I would suggest to explore the benefits of trade for both countries. But it's. I know this could be difficult. The government received a mandate from the voters related with this idea. They protect the economy, American economy. I believe. I respect any other point of view, but tariffs is not a way to protect. Actually, the American economy could be damaged in several ways, including competitiveness vis-a-vis other countries, could be damaged, letting alone China growing and taking over the world trade. I would try to make those points if I can, if I have the chance. I hope you can help me to do that.
All right. Mr. Minister, same question. And I'm going to ask the minister if you don't mind doing it in Spanish, but I'll ask you in English. He understands. From the Dominican Republic, how does President Trump look? And what advice would you give him to strengthen Dominican-American relations?
Bueno.
And it's more complicated for you, obviously,
No.
because you're currently in office, as is Jan as well. But
Quiero comenzar, Carlos, felicitándote por este tipo de evento que viene desarrollando y la oportunidad que yo creo que se le brinda a la comunidad de los estudiantes de oír la experiencia de personas que, como los que están aquí hoy, hablan de la vivencia y los resultados que han podido tener en el manejo de la cosa pública. Y además entusiasmarlo a que participen de cuidar la democracia, de cuidar los valores republicanos, de cuidar lo que es la estabilidad que resulta de vivir en libertad. Y entonces, en ese mismo sentido, podemos ver dos cosas, quiero referirme, del presidente Trump. La primera es que estoy totalmente de acuerdo con el caso de la presencia en el Caribe de las Fuerzas Armadas de los Estados Unidos que buscan parar el tema del narcotráfico y el tema de la inestabilidad. Y esto quizá el presidente Calderón puede recordar, al igual que yo lo hago en este momento, cuando la iniciativa del Plan Colombia bloquea las fronteras sur, ¿verdad? México, ¿qué hace? Que desvía la presencia de la droga hacia el Caribe. Resulta que en el Caribe está la República Dominicana y están otros corredores que vienen después de Venezuela, de Colombia, y que el tránsito hacia los Estados Unidos. El año pasado, solamente en República Dominicana y cocaína, se incineraron 45 toneladas de cocaína que indudablemente no iban destinadas a República Dominicana o a nuestro vecino Haití o a Puerto Rico, venía hacia los Estados Unidos. Entonces, hoy por hoy, la presencia de las fuerzas que están en el Caribe es importante para nosotros, la respaldamos totalmente y ojalá que lleguen acciones que no solamente detengan a los narcotraficantes, sino a narcodictaduras, que son las que facilitan la producción de droga y el deterioro de las sociedades en ese sentido. Luego está indudablemente la política de hoy del presidente Trump y el tema de los aranceles, que ya el presidente Calderón mencionaba, y que República Dominicana casualmente nos toca a nosotros, desde el Ministerio de Industria y Comercio, trabajar con nuestros colegas del USTR y por el lado técnico, si se puede, hemos logrado mantener a la República Dominicana en el nivel más bajo de lo que se registra hoy, que es el 10%. Sin embargo, nosotros aspiramos a que se respete, como se ha respetado con México y con Canadá, los tratados que se han firmado, en el caso nuestro, el DERECAFTA. Esto así, porque viéndolo desde República Dominicana, nosotros somos país pequeño, 48.000 kilómetros cuadrados, pero somos el sexto país que tiene la balanza per cápita a favor de los Estados Unidos. 6.000 millones de dólares anuales. Nosotros no producimos migración ilegal, cero en este momento. Nosotros no producimos ni traficamos, más bien paramos la droga que va hacia los Estados Unidos. Y tampoco en el ámbito comercial tenemos una relación primaria ni de inversión con China en República Dominicana. Y le menciono esto porque son los pilares que argumenta hoy día en los temas de negociación de los aranceles el presidente Trump, que es donde termina de tomar las últimas medidas. Entonces ahora viene la parte incluso de presencia política. Yo con una visión regional, y en esto quizás el secretario Almagro también puede tener la visión, el continente americano es el pulmón principal que tiene el mundo. Las reservas de agua, petróleo, minerales, aunque hay algunos países buenos, y por qué no mencionarlo, como Venezuela, como Nicaragua, el tema Haití, pero no son guerras de alta intensidad. Más bien llegan a delincuencia común. Es un continente de relativa normalidad en comparación con los demás. Democracia, acercamiento, aquello del nearshoring o del friendshoring o del aligned-shoring ahora se puede practicar más con los países que están cerca, por la cadena de suministro, por la cadena de valor, por los nichos de diáspora que hay aquí en los Estados Unidos. Imagínense que nosotros recibimos 10.000 millones de dólares. Este año pueden ser 11.000, a pesar de los aranceles, solamente en remesas de la comunidad dominicana hacia la República Dominicana. Entonces yo creo que debe de haber un tratamiento, un acercamiento, una objetividad del buen socio, del mejor aliado, de estructurar esas alianzas en beneficio de todos, entendiendo que la política que hoy enarbola el presidente Trump no es nada nuevo tampoco, es aquello de la doctrina Monroe, American primero, y reordenando quizás un poco la casa, porque visto desde lejos, también los Estados Unidos es el primero que pone, el primero que está, o al primero que se les reclama. Pero yo creo que cada uno de nosotros, en este caso, lo que me toca es República Dominicana, aspiramos a un mejor entendimiento y a que ese acercamiento y esa buena vecindad se siga fortaleciendo.
What advice would you give the Trump administration to further strengthen the ties between the Dominican Republic and U.S.?
Eso es lo que le digo, que mi recomendación sería que esa buena alianza, ese buen acercamiento, esas votaciones que nosotros hacemos en el Consejo de Seguridad cuando nos tocó dirigir, acompañando la política americana, se pueda fortalecer con señales del buen trato para poder seguir creciendo juntos en los valores republicanos, en los valores de la democracia, en los valores de la libertad que todos queremos. Fíjate, y que yo creo que debemos de impulsar. Por eso te felicité de entrada y por eso rechazamos los aspectos de violencia. Hace un rato mataron a un seguidor de Trump en una manifestación, o no quisiéramos ninguno de nosotros ver lo que está pasando en Nepal, o en Francia, o en Alemania con la protesta, o lo que está pasando en Venezuela hoy día. Entonces, yo creo que podemos hacer más cosas juntos.
Gracias. Secretary General, I'm going to ask you the same question, but not only as somebody who comes from Uruguay, who served in the government of Uruguay, but as somebody who got to have a position where you got to see the affairs of the entire Western Hemisphere. What would you say, how would you assess these first few months of the Trump administration, and what can the administration do to pay more attention to the Western Hemisphere?
First of all, yeah, I think, imagine that I arrived at my position as Secretary General with the Obama administration, then came Trump 1 administration, then came Biden administration, and then Trump again. And the most important thing is to do your own work and to keep your house in order and to do your job in order to promote your initiatives and to deal with the context in the most positive way. When I cannot assess the Trump administration, it's not my job, it never was my job. So I think they act doing the best they believe about their own interest, the interest of the United States of America. But I have to position the region, Latin America, Caribbean countries, and the whole hemisphere in the best possible way to deal with that. Because in trade is the only human activity where you can have winners both sides all the time. When trade was done for that, trade means a lot for the civilization. Trade is something that you can bring countries together and both countries, both persons can win in a situation like that. Security, it is a moral imperative to put security, of course, in the Caribbean region because, I mean, you cannot ask for free navigation for drug traffickers. That is insane. It cannot be like that. You cannot ask for drug traffickers that they are not obliged by the international law. Of course they are, and they are obliged also by national laws. So to restore order and to bring security, it is a relevant matter. It has to be more comprehensive because, because this happened before. You remember when the nephews of Maduro were caught in Haiti, then all the traffic of the Caribbean, drug trafficking in the Caribbean, moved to the Pacific. Mm-hmm. And so it had to be stopped there too. So everything has to be, because if not, you have the cockroach effect. You kill the cockroach here and they run somewhere else. So you have to do it in a coordinated manner. Democracy, it is a very important matter for the region. I mean, our region in this moment has 3 dictatorships, 3 very tyrannic dictatorships, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. We need democracy back in those countries. So if at the same time you break the Cartel de los Soles, you break there a couple of regimes, dictatorships, then it's much better for the region too. So you have all these initiatives going on. So there are a lot of things to engage and do your job even in a better way, engaging in this initiative. So I mean, you just have to do it, and you have to shape up for the occasion and stop whining and crying. It's something that you have to do your job.
Yeah. And I mentioned that the minister has it hard because he's currently in office. You're also currently in office. You're the deputy chief of mission of the Czech Republic in Washington, D.C. So I know that this is going to be a little hard, but how would you assess these first few months of the Trump administration?
Thank you, Carlos, and very happy to be here, very honored to be part of this distinguished group, and also excited to be in Miami. It's my first time, actually, and you guys have a lot of palms and a lot of cars. Thank you. Look, obviously I'm on a thin ice, but no, I want to say the Czechs have generally very positive relations ever since we broke free from communism with the United States over the past 35, 36 years. And we've worked and made it work with any administration, obviously through our accession to NATO and in the post 9/11 world. So I would generally say we're in a good place as a country. I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire European Union or other European countries, obviously, but we did have a great relationship with the first Trump administration, being one of the first countries in the world who declared companies such as Huawei or ZTE presenting a direct threat to our national security and national critical infrastructure. Now, in 2025, President Trump and his team have inherited an incredibly complex and a much more dangerous and difficult world than even before. And our message from Prague to Washington is very simple. We're here to help because we're allies. We're part of NATO. We're part of this transatlantic community. And we're ready to work side by side. And we've been doing that. Obviously, the major issue for us nationally is the Russia's war in Ukraine. As you can see, Russia has been pounding Ukraine every day. Now, our ally Poland was also hit by a swarm of drones, not really testing the. It wasn't a limited incursion. I mean, there were around 20 drones penetrating Polish airspace, and this is serious. And so I definitely would give President Trump an A for giving peace a chance, trying to negotiate with Russia. But as we've seen lately, it's a difficult task, and I'm not sure we're there yet. But obviously, this is one of the topics that is on our mind. The economic situation, and I'm more like, as you said, I spent years dealing with defense and security, so I don't want to pretend I'm a tariff expert. Obviously, the fewer tariffs, the better. But for the European Union, because this is a delegated national competency to Brussels, I mean, so far so good, because it has not really turned into an open trade war between the United States and Europe, and this obviously could be detrimental given the fact that we're one of the largest trading partners in the world, and if you combine the GDP of European Union and the United States, which unfortunately has been declining over the past few years, but still it's a very massive and powerful alliance. So, like I said, we're ready to work. There are a number of issues in foreign policy and security policy that we need to work together. And if you're going to ask me what advice, if I could, and if I would be humbled to be asked to provide an advice, I think I would say, it's good to have allies. It's good to have allies, and it's always better to work with allies than your enemies. And the allies are. It's like a family, right? Some compare it to a marriage. I think it's more like a family. You get different characters, you get different cousins, you get different uncles and friends. But at the end of the day, we're here, all of us together in this as we face an increasingly dangerous world dominated by China, Russia, regionally in Europe, and obviously technologically very complex world.
Great, thank you. Sara, I'm thrilled to hear your take on this because you have a very unique vantage point in that you worked in the White House for many years, and now you worked at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where you get to work with all 50 states, but also with the administration. How would you assess these first few months of the Trump administration?
Well, thank you, Carlos. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but very delighted to be part of this elite group. And in terms of the Trump administration, I think one of the big words that we hear from the business community is uncertainty. And I'll talk through that lens. As we look at uncertainty across the private sector, it is more significant now than ever before. And you even look at the uncertainty back in the COVID years, we have surpassed that level of uncertainty in this first few months. There are some positive things coming out of the administration. For example, the recent tax bill did extend tax cuts for businesses. That gave them back a bit of certainty, understanding that they are not about to absorb an increase in their taxes. And so that stability helps them be able to plan for the future and know what's coming. But there's still a lot of uncertainty, of course, around trade and tariffs. We understand tariffs to be essentially a tax on businesses, which then those costs have to be filtered down to the consumers. And so as businesses are trying to understand all the moving parts with tariffs and still a lot of negotiations to happen down the road, how they plan ahead for their businesses, there are certain things that we have to get from other countries, and trade is imperative to the global economy. And if we can't get products into the United States or exported into countries that need our products, that hurts everyone. And so we want stability. We want to see free trade and, of course, free markets. And so we support the concept of resolution quickly, number one, but with limited tariffs, because again, that trickles down and stifles our economy. If businesses can't plan, if they can't grow, that leads to lack of innovation, that leads to lack of growth within our own economy. And we're concerned what that holds for inflation and other cost factors. So we are concerned about the trade and tariff situation. We're also looking at some potential improvements on the regulatory side. So that's some positive moves from the administration. The previous administration put a lot of regulation around businesses, which made it, again, very hard for them to operate and create innovation. So on the regulatory side, there may be some additional improvements coming. So it really is a bit, there are some pros, there are some challenges, and we're trying to navigate that fine balance between what's going to make the economy thrive, what's going to make businesses grow. And we know what a business does to their communities. It's about supporting workers and employees. And when people have jobs and they're able to flourish in their communities, that means a lot to our citizens and families around the country, but it also impacts globally. So we're worried about immigration reform. We need to see legal immigration, where we have more workers in this country, and we have more jobs than actual workers, and we see more and more workers falling off of the participating rate. So immigration is a really big issue. So there's a lot that the Trump administration has facing them. They have wars on a global scale and a lot of challenges. We want the best for the administration to support, the mission that needs to take place. But we've got a lot of challenges, but some opportunities that we can work with them on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to ask a different question to each one of you. And I want to begin with the minister. Because when we think of the Dominican Republic, we think of beautiful beaches, we think of tourism, it's a beautiful island. But it's also a great place to invest. It's a great place to do business. And as I give speeches around the country and talk about nearshoring, you mentioned nearshoring, ally shoring, friendshoring, I mentioned something that I'm going to say, not because you're here, I do it all over the world, that there's no country that has taken advantage of nearshoring better and in a more effective way than the Dominican Republic. You have a lot of young people here who are hopefully going to invest in one day. What are you doing as minister to create a positive environment so that people can invest? And why should people invest in the Dominican Republic?
Bueno, lo primero es lo que Dios nos ha dado, y es, tú señalabas las playas, el Caribe, el clima, pero también la posición geográfica. Nosotros estamos localizados a 2 horas en avión de los Estados Unidos y a 2 días en barco de los principales puertos. Pudiera ser menos si es de la costa norte de los Estados Unidos, que es el principal mercado consumidor del mundo. Independientemente de eso, no hay una cosa más cobarde que el dinero. El dinero, donde siente miedo, donde hay riesgo, sencillamente se va. Y en un país como la República Dominicana, donde hay estabilidad económica, estabilidad social, estabilidad política, se hace entonces atractivo mirar para allá. Incluso nosotros, independientemente de los gobiernos que hemos tenido en la República Dominicana, tenemos décadas creciendo a un 5% anual. Este año, que según el Fondo Monetario, Banco Mundial, Standard & Poor's, andamos por los 3.5, es la resiliencia global. Los países de la región, a excepción de Guyana, que con el tema del petróleo, van a crecer menos que nosotros, incluyendo a los Estados Unidos. Entonces, por eso se da, y le quiero poner 3 ejemplos. En los últimos 4 meses hay 3 operaciones que nosotros le hemos dado seguimiento. Cemex se posiciona, se coloca en su inversión más hacia Europa y pone en venta su posición en República Dominicana de producción de cemento. Y en 1 o 2 meses, otra cementera, Progreso se llama, que está en la región, lo compra por 950 millones de dólares. Una cifra importante. Los árabes de Dubái tienen una inversión en República Dominicana en DP World. Pero DP World tiene inversión en Perú, en Ecuador y otras tantas en la región. Sin embargo, amplían su posición en República Dominicana por un valor de 760 millones de dólares, porque ya República Dominicana, además de inversión, se ve como un hub logístico de conectividad. Edwards es una de las grandes compañías de medical device de los Estados Unidos y vende su posición a BP por 4.2 billones de dólares. El 80% de su inversión está en la zona franca de República Dominicana. Entonces, clarísimo que para hacer este tipo de inversiones, que ninguna es del sector turístico, que también es muy importante, es porque confía en el crecimiento, en la alianza público-privada, en la estabilidad. Nosotros acabamos de hacer algo que para mí en esta oportunidad es casi mágico. Y podemos poner de ejemplo, bueno, raras excepciones, Uruguay. El presidente Abinader convoca a los expresidentes, tenemos 3 vivos, y de gobiernos recientes, con diferencias importantes, porque hay incluso sometimientos judiciales, decisiones judiciales, que pudieran verse que se distancien las relaciones políticas. Y acuden a una reunión donde se ocupan de los problemas principales de la República Dominicana. Y yo creo que eso es una señal poderosísima en situaciones como la que están viviendo la democracia del mundo, o la fortaleza del ambiente político de los diferentes países. Y en eso la República Dominicana entonces crea un ambiente de seguridad para la inversión y de crecimiento para la inversión. Nuestra inversión extranjera directa registra un crecimiento permanente año por año. Hace 4 años estábamos hablando de unos 3.000 y pico de millones de dólares. Este año quizás cerramos en 5.000 millones de dólares. Nuestras exportaciones siguen creciendo tanto de zona franca como del sector industrial. Los turistas siguen llegando. En el 2019 habían 7 millones. Este año vamos a cerrar en 11 millones de turistas. Van a igualar la población que tenemos y creciendo permanentemente. Así que yo lo invito a ustedes a que piensen también hacer algo en República Dominicana.
And speaking of the Dominican Republic, it really is hot. So in 3 months, you're going to host the Summit of the America, which is a gathering of all heads of state of the Western Hemisphere, from Canada all the way down to Chile and Argentina, everyone. And the center is sponsoring a number of big events during that gathering the first week in December. So we'll be there.
Y van a ser en 2 modalidades. Casualmente, en esta ocasión, queremos poner a la Cumbre de las Américas de cara a la inversión, o sea, de la mano de la alianza privada, CEO de las grandes compañías, personas que quieran invertir. Bueno, pues va a ser esa dinámica primero y después el ambiente político. Pero antes de eso, por ejemplo, tenemos ahora el 2 y 3 de octubre el Foro Económico Mundial. Antes hacía un Foro Económico para América Latina que tiene varios años que no lo celebra. Bueno, ahora los árabes se han interesado en mirar hacia América Latina y van a hacer el Foro Económico en Punta Cana también 2 y 3 de octubre.
Con el CAP.
O sea, bueno, con el Centro de Análisis de Política Económica, sí, que lo acompañamos, pero yo creo que lo importante de que República Dominicana se ha convertido no solamente en un centro de atracción de inversión, sino también en un punto donde pueden llegar, converger los países del entorno y nosotros ser unos buenos anfitriones.
Mr. President, wondering if you can talk a little bit about, and I don't want to put you in any difficult positions, but about the state of democracy in Mexico. There's a lot of talk. Some people say that, it's a healthy democracy. The president was elected by a landslide majority. Others are very concerned about what's happening with the judicial reform. From your vantage point, how would you assess the state of Mexican democracy today?
First, hearing what Mr. Bisonó was saying, I want to express my absolute condemn about what happened today with Charlie Kirk. I don't know if he's, I understand he's alive, I believe. It's very, no? My God. So I'm really sorry I condemn absolutely this kind of attacks, whoever could be. And of course, my solidarity with his family, with the American people. My prayers with him, his soul, with his family. It's terrible what is happening. So I needed to say that. Going for addressing the state of democracy in Mexico, I have serious concerns about what is happening. I know that probably the pragmatic approach say nothing, but honestly, you cannot stay silent about what is happening. First, Mexico has lost check and balances. Check and balances are de facto disappeared. And the last year, the government, and I need to say mainly the previous president, yes, took over the control of electoral institutions. Having them on hand, those electoral institutions gave to the ruling party, Morena, a constitutional majority in Congress that never won by votes. So they got, yes, a lot of votes, 55%, and the institutions gave them 75% of the seats. And with that majority, changed the Constitution just to erase, to disappear the only counterweight against the president that used to be the Supreme Court of Justice. So with that reform, yes, all the judges, all the magistrates, all the ministers were fired last September the 1st. I'm talking about almost 20,000 people, including the ministers of the Supreme Court. And they have been substituted for people, roughly, the only thing in common they have is they were checked and approved by a special commission that determined who could be candidate and who not. Basically, only members of the ruling party or supporters of the ruling party. What does it imply? It implies that no one citizen, no one company has the legal guarantees that are required in a rule of law state, let alone the oppositors. They can do whatever with us. And they disappear the Independent Commission, Antitrust Commission, Telecom Commission, Human Rights Commission, Right of Information Commission, everything. Everything is under the control of a party, even in a group in the party. So, of course, the presidency, the Congress, and the Supreme Court, and now any institution. Second, organized crime has been in power like never before. 268 people linked with the electoral process last year were killed. 268. 40 of them were candidates for mayor, for councilor, for congressman. 40 candidates killed in 2024. The opposition claimed 3 years ago that organized crime participated, intervened, and decided the election of governors, mainly in the Pacific states, Sinaloa, Sonora, Baja California Sur, Colima, several of them. And third point, I'm talking about, yep, she won and they won overwhelming in part because the lack of serious opposition there. Unfortunately, I resigned from my party several years ago. But think about this. Carlos Ursúa, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary de Hacienda, under López Obrador, the first one, wrote an article and demonstrated that for the budget 2024, the government overestimated, talking about one item in the budget, the pension for senior people, overestimated an amount equivalent to $2.5 billion. I repeat, $2,500 million. And Ursúa said that money was going to be deviated to support illegally Morena's party. $2.5 billion. Then Ursúa, by the way, died 2 months later, that article, in an accident at home. He fell down from stairs or something like that. So could we consider that as a fair elections, fair competitions, equal condition? I believe not. Without guarantees of the Supreme Court, without guarantees of the rule of law, without judges, without minister, independent and unbiased, I think Mexican democracy fell down, and I believe it's not going to be reverted in the short or medium time.
Wow. And speaking of democracy, Mr. Secretary General, you were a very strong voice for democracy throughout the Americas, especially in Venezuela. Where do we go forward? What do you think the international community can do? You tried your best as Secretary General of the OAS. The dictatorship has been in power for over a quarter of a century now. Where do we go next? What can we do? Is there hope?
The defense of democracy, it had to do more than only Venezuela, of course. And nobody remembers you because of the things you have said. But as it was said by Hammarskjöld, multilateralism doesn't take people to heaven, but sometimes can avoid hell for some. And we have done that. We have done very successful transitions in Guyana, in Guatemala, Peru, in Suriname. Very successful transitions. And we can count 11 about. We can count 14 times that we applied the Inter-American Democratic Charter in order to sustain governance and governability in the countries. The three extreme cases that we have, and Venezuela is one of the cases. I always think that Cuba is the most serious case always, because here, if we make the traceability of all these bad practices, how they have poisoned democracies all around.
Trace it back to Cuba.
You trace it back to Cuba, even in Venezuela, even in Nicaragua, even in countries that now are struggling. You go make the traceability and you go to Cuba. So, and you see, because always it's very difficult to talk about Cuba, because if you talk about Cuba in your country, you may have a strike of education or a strike of transport or whatever, and nobody wants to run those issues. Nobody wants to deal with those problems. I think we, at the organization, we had the tools we had. We used them all, and that was related mainly to illegitimacy of the regimes. We brought illegitimacy to Cuba, to Nicaragua, and to Venezuela. We have to see that 10 years ago, Cuba was a sort of a normal country again in the Americas. Well, now today is again a dictatorship. Venezuela, the regime was doing whatever they wanted, and nobody was even complaining about it. So, and we brought illegitimacy to the regime of Venezuela and also to Nicaragua. But we don't have more tools. We don't have at the organization more tools than those. Illegitimacy. We didn't have tools for regime change. Good or bad, we didn't have those tools, so we are not applicable. What we could do, we did it all. Hope, yes.
So there is hope for democracy.
There is hope for democracy, because what we see in these three countries is completely failed projects, failure systems that have completely failed. You see, they have failed politically, because they cannot even consult the basic things to the society. They have to steal the sovereignty from the people and not to give it back ever again. They are, at the economic point of view, they are the lowest of the lowest. You can see it with Venezuela. It's an extreme case, because you transform a rich country in a very poor country with the biggest humanitarian crisis, with the biggest migration crisis ever in the history of the region. And you see it in Nicaragua, too. That is a country that Even now, I think they don't have the level of the GDP that they had before the Sandinista revolution. So you see that all those systems have failed. So when they have failed, there should be a pressure on an initiative for change in those countries. And there should be pressure and initiative for change in those countries.
And you mentioned that you use all the tools that the OAS had. Yeah. One of the tools that the OAS doesn't have is, of course, military force. But member states do have that tool. Yeah. Should that be an option?
But it's not available.
But it's available to countries. It's available to the United States. It's available to other countries. Should that be on the table?
But according to international law, you know, international law, if you have something called the Security Council of the United Nations, of course, the use of force has to be done according to international law. It cannot be done against international law. It has to be done according to international law, and it has to be done in a proper way. You do these maneuvers in the Caribbean, for example,
which currently the United States is doing.
Yeah, yes, we talked about that in the previous question. It's something that you are entitled to do that because of your security, because of national, regional security, and to, of course, sustain the peace of the region. But you have to keep your hands, have to keep grabbing international law, because if you let it go, then, I mean, you give a space for you are leaving a strategic concept that is very relevant, and you cannot leave it behind. So aggression should be condemned. And for example, in this region, we have 1 week, yes, and another week again, a threat of the Venezuelan regime against Guyana. And they keep doing it. They keep doing it. So it's something that is a permanent threat to peace in the region. And we see that what happened with the aggression of Russia to Ukraine, that is something that you cannot leave impunity for that. You have to be very strong in defending this kind of international positions. So at the end of the day, of course, is you know what is leadership? Even in a classroom, is when you have more friends than the others. That is leadership. If you don't have friends, you end without not being a leader. Mm-hmm. You cannot be a leader hitting people around. You have to be the best friend, and you have to have more friends than the others. And you have to make a process of accumulation, a political accumulation, and legal accumulation that can allow these things. And it happened before in the region. It happened in Panama with Noriega. It was practically an archetype case of also an
1989
a state controlled by drug trafficker. So it has been done in the past. It is not that something that has never happened, but it has to be done. It has to be. International law is an imperative, and it's an imperative for leadership, for proper leadership. Mm-hmm.
We mentioned the war in Ukraine a couple of times, and of course, the Czech Republic is a member of NATO, as we talked about. And you mentioned President Trump's efforts to bring about peace. What else can Europeans do to help in that process? I give some, when I travel to Europe and talk about NATO, I always mention that President Trump is right in demanding that NATO pay its share. It was initially the 2% that they all agreed. Now we're going up to 5%. But what can Europeans do? What can NATO do? This affects the U.S., but it affects Europe even more than the U.S.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, if I may, Carlos, before answering your question, sure. Just maybe a comment on the international law by Luis. I fully agree with you. I mean, we cannot disregard it, and you know, the international affairs should not be and do not happen in vacuum. At the same time, when you have two, maybe, you know, members of the National Security Council who like to twist the international law, I'm of course referring to Russia with its flagrant violation of the UN Charter and its attack against Ukraine. And then, of course, China always trying to adjust and use the loopholes in international law and adhering to different standards. Then I think we face a serious problem. You know, if we're fans of multilateral organizations, I think we need to recognize that there are some limitations, and it's not easy. But I would love to share your optimism and hope, and I'm by nature also an optimistic person, but it's a tough world. Now, on Europe, I fully agree with you. I mean, we need to take our share of responsibility for our own defense. If you look at the history of transatlantic affairs post-World War II, and I'm going to be talking about this in the classes that I'll be teaching. Enough of the advertisement, but this has been a structural.
And I'm going to ask you about your classes in the next question. So hold that
this has been a structural problem between the Americans and Europeans ever since NATO started in 1949. The Europeans committing to developing certain capabilities, building up a force, and then not really delivering and surfing on that peace dividend up until very recently. And so some may not like President Trump's rhetoric. I mean, it can be pretty straightforward, definitely not the kind of a diplomacy that people are used to, but it has had its effect when it comes to European defense spending. So, but like here in America and the United States, we also have our problems with the defense industrial base. I mean, we have a lot of know-how, we have a lot of potential, we have a lot of manufacturing potential. We have that capacity, but for some reason, we're now in year 4 in the war against Ukraine, and we still haven't been able to ramp up our production when it comes to major defense systems, and not only in terms of supporting the Ukrainians in their fight against Russia and their defense against the Russian aggression, but also, ramping up our defenses in NATO. So we do have a problem. But like I said, we also, on the positive side, we have companies and people who are talented and who are willing to work together with the United States. And in fact, over the past couple of years, Czech companies have been investing here in defense sector in the United States, creating jobs in America. But obviously, we need to do our homework as well. And so I don't have the right answer to that question or a new answer to that question. It's pretty straightforward. Just invest in defense, like some countries have done, and some countries are way above 2% of GDP.
How's the Czech Republic?
We're at 2%. I mean, and the current government has agreed to go all the way to 3.5. But tricky situation. We're facing general elections now. But obviously, the message is clear. We need to invest in hardware, but we also need to invest in infrastructure. So I think the Czechs get it. We're not a frontline state. We're sitting comfortably, surrounded by friendly countries, allies, and partners. But obviously, we're in a dangerous spot and vulnerable spot too.
In one of the most beautiful European countries, if I may say.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned beer
Prague is gorgeous.
Bohemian Crystal or Prague, but yes.
Prague is gorgeous. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Sara, I'm going to ask you a very, very different question because I'm going to take advantage of an opportunity to do some promotion for the center, because we are about to launch an initiative on first spouses. Most of them are first ladies. There are a few first gentlemen in the world, but we believe, and the person who's running it is right here, sitting, putting her on the spot. But I believe that the spouse of the leader, the spouse of the president, the head of state, could be incredibly important in helping to shape initiatives, whether it's social initiatives or other initiatives. And they don't always get, certainly not the academic attention that they deserve, but even the public attention outside their countries. And you worked for the First Lady of the United States. You were Deputy Chief of Staff, and you got to see firsthand how the First Lady's initiatives really made a difference. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about that role of the First Lady and how we can use that position, whether it's First Lady or First Husband or First Spouse, to help advance the causes that we care about in the center: economic freedom, prosperity, growth, from your perspective as somebody who's worked closely with the First Lady of the United States.
Well, sure. It's an interesting role and an important role. It's not elected. And so in many ways, a spouse comes in a role that is thrust upon them. And they have to figure out how and what kind of leader that they want to be. And every first spouse, first lady chooses different paths in what they care about. But they are an important part of the administration, and they're an important partner with the president because they can talk about issues that are more appealing to certain voters, and they can tackle issues that are not as easy for the president to tackle. And so the opportunities there are really incredible, and oftentimes they are more popular than the sitting president.
Yep.
And I recall working in the First Lady's office, and we'd often get called to have the First Lady attend events because at that time she was polling higher than President Bush was. And so she was uh, rightfully asked to attend a lot of events. Um, it is a tough role for some spouses to figure out where they fit in. One of the unique things is to also watch them pivot. I had a front row seat to watch First Lady Laura Bush, begin her First Lady role in what would be traditional and comfortable for her. She championed education, books, reading, and that came from her history as a librarian, as a teacher herself. That was a comfortable path for her. But then she realized the importance of her role. After 9/11, she became the comforter in chief. And she realized she finally had a platform that was important to the country. And she began to tackle bigger issues. She began to tackle global issues and really started to find her footing outside of what had traditionally been her comfort zone. And so she was the first lady of the United States to ever speak on a presidential radio show. And she took that opportunity to talk about the plight of the Burmese women. And so that moment in history for a first lady to take that presidential radio address and make it an issue that was global in nature was really a first. And so I think as we see modern first ladies grow and expand their portfolios and realize the platform that they have to create change, to lead at a global level, it's a really special place to see them evolve in what they can accomplish for a non-elected position.
In a moment of shameless promotion, I want to announce that the first event that we're going to do as part of this First Spouses Initiative, we're hoping that it will be in the Dominican Republic when the heads of state gather for the Summit of the Americas, and hopefully the minister can help us really enlist the First Lady of the Dominican Republic to lead this effort for our first gathering in December. So we're counting on you.
Ojalá.
And continue with the self-promotion. I want to ask each one of you in 1 minute or less, if you can summarize what you're going to be teaching over the next 8 weeks in your study groups. The title of your study group and what are some of the topics that you'll be teaching our students in these 8-week sessions. Ministro.
Bueno, indudablemente comencé felicitándote y yo creo que parte de ello es porque los que puedan asistir a las clases o participar de ellas van a ver la historia viva. Primero de los éxitos, porque a todo el mundo le gusta hablar de las cosas buenas y más si tiene una medallita, pero también de cómo no hacer las cosas para no cometer los mismos errores. En el caso nuestro, que entramos en plena pandemia, con un país cerrado, cómo nosotros hemos podido duplicar nuestras exportaciones, cómo nosotros hemos podido salir de una lista de 28 años, la lista negra de comercio, que es el informe 301 del USTR, no solamente salir de ahí, sino ser referente en la región ahora, por respeto al derecho a la propiedad intelectual, por registro de marca, por el combate a los ilícitos, cómo nosotros hemos podido potencializar la confianza y subir como lo hizo la calificadora Moody's, que nos subió a BA2 recientemente, y hemos podido mantener todo tipo de estabilidad, cómo hemos podido manejar el tema con Haití, la relación de comercio y la relación de la frontera ante esta inestabilidad. ¿Cómo nosotros podemos decir lo orgulloso que nos sentimos de que nuestro presidente firmara un decreto declarando terrorista al cartel de los soles, por ejemplo? Y como ya le comenté que apoyamos como política de Estado la presencia en el Caribe para contrarrestar la droga y la inestabilidad a la democracia y a la libertad. Y yo creo que contándole cada uno de estos episodios a los que asistan y teniéndolo como experiencia, además de que puedan ver de que se pueden hacer cosas muy positivas, apoyando a nuestros pueblos con las pymes, con la participación de las mujeres, con la preservación del medio ambiente, con la educación, con ese desafío ahora que tenemos con la educación STEM y los semiconductores para la región. Yo creo que hay muchas cosas que podemos, cada uno de los que participa de esto, contar, y nosotros tenemos nuestra agenda y eso es lo que vamos a
¿Y
hacer.
la clase los viernes?
Los viernes de 3 a 4 y media.
3 a 4 y media.
Sí, 8 veces de aquí a diciembre.
Perfecto. Mr. President.
Well, first is going to be quite interesting seminar, I believe. The title is Linear Country, a small country with 130 million people, like Mexico.
The 12th biggest economy in the world?
Well, I hope still. No, I don't think so, Roy, unfortunately anymore. But anyway, first 8 sessions. First is going to be, the title is about the Mexican transition seen by inside. Why? Because I would talk about my own starting in politics, which was in a very autocratic regime, the PRI. My father was a utopian guy, and since I was a child, I was with my father knocking doors, handing out flyers, without hope, without any chances to win, and I started that. But when I was president of the PAN, the main opposition party in Mexico, I had the privilege to negotiate with President Zedillo the Mexican transition for democracy. So they created the first independent autonomous institution, organizing elections, establishing better rules. And 4 years later, that was when one member of my party, folks, won finally, the war alternative, and that was democracy. Second class will be lessons about campaigns and strategies. And the fact is, in my case, is one where as the underdog, President Fox didn't like me. He was supporting another fellow member of the party. We had a very strong difference. I resigned, and I started to swim alone in the ocean and traveling from the dark side to the dark side of the moon. I was against all odds. I won the primaries. I was like 16 points behind to the other candidate on the left, a guy whose name is Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And finally, I defeated him. How to do that? It could be interesting for someone. And then the rest will be, I was talking about cases in the administration, one about emergency. So the first pandemic, global pandemic in the world, category 6, was no COVID, was H1N1. And the outbreak it was not in China, it was exactly in Mexico City. So suddenly one day somebody told you, what, Mr. President, a lot of people, healthy people, young people is dying from a typical pneumonia, what is happening? And then somebody says, Mr. President, it's a new virus, completely unknown, which is killing our people. And I will talk about that. Second, it's going to be a structural problem, which I was saying a few minutes ago, that we suffered the consequences of international recession in 2009. Because, you know, the recession came from the core of the recession was the American domestic market. Mexico, as the largest exporter to the United States of as domestic supplier, we suffered. And the recession in Mexico, I remember the figures in my computer, we were going down at the rate at 9 and 10% negative quarterly, annually considered. So how to deal with the crisis, how to do in that situation, how can you deal with the number, with the unemployment, with the fears of the people, how you can preserve the jobs. when all the export industry is saying we will go outside.
All the easy stuff.
Other is stuff. Other would be related with dealing with unions, public utility, and other affairs. So when you have a union dealing with electricity utility owned by a state, 43,000 union workers out of 44,000 employees in the company, and they are threatening you with general strike, threatening you with blocking and canceling the electricity services for a small city like Mexico City with 22 million inhabitants. How to do with that?
It's a long presidential minute.
Well, my God. That's my favorite case, by the way. The third will be related with international negotiation, because I took the responsibility to organize the COP, the Climate Change Conference, after the great failure of Copenhagen, that there was no agreement. Regardless, there were President Obama, there were all the European leaders in Copenhagen, a lot of people there. There was a failure, and then the next organizer of the COP was Mexico. Then, how to deal with China, African countries, Saudi Arabia, Chavez, Lula, my friends in the neighborhood. It was quite an interesting case. So against all odds, the convention was a great success. Why? How to do that? And the final, maybe final two, will be about what I consider the worst problem for Latin America, which is violence, public security, narco traffic, organized crime. How to deal with them? I believe a lot of people will attack me in Mexico, most people on the left and the populist side, that my fault was to attack crime and organized crime and narco traffic. And still, with all my weaknesses and failures or whatever, I believe it's the right decision, it's the ethical decision, it's the mandate you receive from the Constitution, it's the mandate you receive from the law, and what are the people expecting from you? So I decided to face the crime with full force of the state, with the rule, with the law in the hand, yes, with the full force of the state. I took the risk. I extradited more than 500 people to the United States. We seized like 180,000 guns and weapons, 90% coming from the United States. Excuse me. So it's going to be a great, interesting case, I believe. So I hope a lot of students
Tuesdays
will attend.
And Thursdays.
Tuesday and Thursday at noon, 12 o'clock, if I understand.
Lunchtime. Jan, not a presidential minute, please.
No. So in those 10 seconds left, no. But I was going to ask the president if I can also attend his class. Sounded very interesting. Over the past 25 years, I've worked with Americans in various capacities, NGOs, international organizations, as a current government official and former Ministry of Defense official. So I want to take a holistic look at the transatlantic relations. I want to start by looking at the lessons of leadership in foreign policy. I think it's important that we look at various models throughout the 20th century and how they might apply to the current world. I've worked in various crises in the national capacity. I've spent quite a lot of time on countering hybrid interference, so I would like to cover that, even though you could debate whether it's a political warfare or hybrid warfare. I don't want to go down that path, but I think it's going to be an interesting subject, being pressured by large countries and what that does to your society. I also want to talk about Europe as a security international diplomacy actor. I want to take a look at strategic communications and again what that does in current global affairs. And one of the lessons and one of the classes will be on our former president Václav Havel, who I thought was one of the late 20th century's leaders and a prime example of how a human approach to foreign diplomacy, to international diplomacy, can have a very positive effect. And obviously, we're here in Miami, and you very well know that human rights were a big part of his legacy. But he was also a statesman who didn't shy from being pretty, what you would call hawkish on some of the military interventions, etc. So, and I spent 6.5 years in Brussels, both in NATO and working with the European Union. So I'll be looking at how these summits are very often prepared and what goes into the negotiation. So I think it's going to be an interesting overview from someone who has been in international affairs in various capacities for the past 20 years, and I'm still going. So this is just
Your class will be what days?
Thursdays. Only
Time?
Thursdays. I don't know what time.
We do room at the time.
We don't have a room and a time yet. We'll have to work it out with the
11 to 12:30.
All right.
11 to 12:30.
Yeah.
There we
okay.
go.
I'll be there.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General.
Ex-Secretary General. Now I am Director of Observatory for Democracy in CASLA. Yes. I will deal with politics, institutions, and development, and how political decisions can affect the pattern of development of a country, and how political mistakes, for example, have taken countries down the road from the first to the third world in 1 second, or in more. Other, for example, we talked about the failed processes of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, for example, how they have taken these countries completely down the drain just with political mistakes. And also the right governance and how you should do it in order to make things more successful. I was part of a successful government, and I think I did the right governance for the Organization of American States with very few sticks and very few peanuts. I made a battle against countries with oil countries with billions and billions of millions of GDP. So if I could challenge them, just because of political decisions that were taken in the right direction.
Thank you.
So about that.
So students can bring the lunch to my class.
Okay,
To say
perfect,
that.
perfect. Sarah?
Important.
We have Sarah up there.
I'm here, but I'm having technical challenges.
Okay. We'll hear you.
I'm still here. Yes, unfortunately, my camera is not cooperating, but I'm looking forward to sharing some of the stories from my experience. We'll explore leadership, basically at the intersection of government, politics, and business. And some of the stories will look into how the White House operates and how it impacts public policy and how the operation of the White House works. So we'll uncover some of the mysteries of what happens at the White House and within an administration. We'll explore American politics. It really is a fascinating place to be, and sometimes still confusing for those of us who are in it. So American politics will be part of our discussion. What takes place during the political season and how the political season operates. And then we'll explore, topics around the business community, the importance of global trade. We'll talk about some of the issues that we talked about today, but also the importance of free enterprise. I do want to spend some of the courses on free enterprise, the value of it, why it's so important to our country and to the world itself. So I think those are three major categories that we'll split over the course of those classes.
And you'll be teaching on Wednesday afternoons, if I remember
We're
correctly?
looking at Wednesdays, I believe at 3 p.m., but we will confirm that with all the class session titles as well.
Great, thank you. And as you get ready to ask questions, I was hoping we could have half an hour for questions. We're not going to have half an hour, but we will have a few minutes for Q&A. As you get your questions ready, I do want to make a plug for these study groups. They're open to FIU students, and they're a great opportunity to learn from people who have done real things, very practical experience, who are going to share with you stories. Hopefully, Mr. President, you talk about the story of how you actually took the oath of office, how you came in from the back door. It's a fascinating story. We don't have time here, but it's a very fascinating story. And by the way, speaking of the president, and speaking of a previous topic, first spouses, he is the first spouse of a former fellow. His wife, who's a member of Congress right now, came and was a fellow this past semester. And these study groups are not only a great opportunity to learn from amazing leaders like the ones you have here before you, but also to get internships. And Ivan here, who was a student in his wife's class, Margarita's class, was an intern in the Mexican Congress this past summer. So they're a great opportunity to actually learn from people who have done amazing things and perhaps even get an internship. Anyway, so thank you
Great.
to Margarita for offering.
Yeah, she's
she's amazing.
She's a great one.
Anyway, as you get ready for your questions, we have a microphone. Okay, there we go. Let's ask the students, if the students can go first. Yes, right here. The microphone is, say who you are and if you're a student, what you're studying.
Hello, my name is Ana. I'm Spanish and I study international relations, economics, and a certificate in European and Euro-Asian studies. So my question is for Jan.
There you go.
So focusing on soft powers in European diplomacy, do you think they still carry a weight in transactional diplomacy, or do you think harder powers should be more focused when bringing conflict resolutions in diplomacy? Thank you.
I think, thanks for the question. That's the eternal question, right? For me, I've always seen it as a continuum, really. I mean, nobody starts in diplomacy by sending troops and tanks into a situation. So I think the way I've observed, and I'm sure the gentleman here can confirm it, the way I've observed international relations, there has always been a lot of effort to talk and to speak to one another. And frankly, I mean, you have to talk to your counterparts even if you disagree with them, and in the worst case, if they're your enemies. I think, dialogue should always come so that at least the other party understands where you're coming from and what your position is and where you disagree with them. Sometimes it's impossible. Again, bringing the situation about ceasefire in Ukraine, I mean, that's an illustrative case. President Zelensky is willing to meet President Putin almost anywhere, maybe other than Moscow, but for obvious reasons. There has not been really a response despite the effort by President Trump. And so, yes, I mean, dialogue and soft power is important. And soft power, obviously, we're talking about public diplomacy, communications in general, and with the world we're living in with technology, I think we're getting a whole new dimension. And if I may do another self-promotion here, I've just written an article on AI and diplomacy and how it is shaping and reshaping the kind of a work that I'm doing and my other colleagues are doing. So I want to talk about that in the class as well. But I don't think that soft power is gone. It's just different and it changes with the whole world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, another question? Right here, yep.
Good afternoon. My name is Edgardo Pinel. I am a Nicaraguan lawyer and journalist in Spain. Currently, I am in exile. I would like to ask a question about the geopolitical issue. How important is Spain in the transatlantic relationship? If this is important, what is the opinion about the President Pedro Sanchez's refusal to recognize Edmundo González as president-elect of Venezuela and the link the former President Zapatero with the Maduro regime?
Anybody? One of the people here on this panel is European, and the other one lives in Spain. So maybe
The other reason.
Spain, I'm not European.
Well, let me say, I believe that currently Sanchez recognized Gutierrez Edmundo at the beginning, but his behavior was completely contrary at what the Venezuelans decided in the elections. And it has been so sad to see how the behavior of former president, actually, we coincided in Mexico with Rodrigo Zapatero. He was president of Spain, I was president of Mexico. This actually to serve probably the worst, the darkest interests of the authoritarian regime of Maduro. I believe that most of the people of Spain understand that. However, what is happening is, I believe the political regime in Spain has a very bad incentives to assign political cost to such kind of decisions. I believe that this parliamentarian regime in which to elect a president, in which the last votes is like at the textbook of microeconomics, that the marginal cost is the cost that defines the entire price. the marginal cost of getting the votes of the regionalists, the nationalists, the Catalans and Navarros and Basques, etc., those votes are determining foreign policy that probably most of the Spanish don't want, and maybe even the government, most of the people in the government don't want either. But that's what is happening. How to get better understanding and support to Venezuela and Nicaragua, no? That's terrible. 6 opposition leaders have died this year in Nicaragua in jail. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking. Of course, every of us are concerned about Venezuela, but Nicaragua could be the worst case in terms of craziness and torture and abuse. And anyway, but I believe that we need to find a way in which we can push foreign governments, including in Spain and others, to push for democracy in real sense. I believe when I spoke at the Plaza del Sol in favor of Venezuela, I recognize the effort of all the parties supporting democracy, all the parties. Once the movement pro-Venezuela is taken, but one party like Vox, I think it doesn't help anything for the cause, nothing. So I believe that we need to switch the strategy, I think, how can push together in order to mobilize massive international support for democracy in Venezuela.
Yo quisiera, no como funcionario público, debo decir, porque soy ministro en funciones, pero sí como presidente de un centro de análisis político. Y es que en julio en Venezuela se dieron unas elecciones que yo creo que es público y se contactó de que el pueblo quiere un cambio y que no se respetó eso, que muy por el contrario, hoy se tipifica como una dictadura y algo más que eso. Y en países como España, bueno, pues cada país escoge su política exterior. Sin embargo, es curioso ver cómo dentro del partido que hoy domina la política, el gobierno español, hay personas que son referentes como Felipe González, claro, que sí entiende que la democracia y el voto popular debe de prevalecer en Venezuela como se manifestó el pueblo. Hay otros dentro de ese mismo partido que argumentan cosas con las que no se puede estar de acuerdo, que fueron procesos, que bueno, él y otras personas que fueron a defender a Maduro y a defender lo que ellos hicieron y a justificarlo. Pero yo creo que lo demás es público y que debemos defender la democracia, la libertad y las transiciones, cualquiera que se den con la expresión del voto popular.
Time for 2 more questions. Oh, wow. Okay, let's do students. Do 1 and 2. Go ahead. And they'll stick around afterwards so you can ask questions afterwards.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I'm a policy major and starting a certificate in Cuban research studies. I would like to ask Secretary Almagro, how do you believe a democratic transition should start in Cuba? What steps should be taken by residents on the island and the diaspora, and what would you recommend?
Easy.
In 2 minutes or less.
Yeah, it's the previous question was coming with an answer. That's why I didn't want to answer it, because the guy who made the question was coming with his own reflections related to the point, and it was not an open question. It was a question that was coming already mined with an opinion. Second, I mean, it's very difficult to judge positions of any country, any government takes about any international position, any international issue. It cannot be the job of us to judge them. Say that, of course, I have been harsh with some people that, and I will say it with all the names, former President Rodríguez Zapatero, that have acted as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Venezuelan regime and has a strong influence on the Spanish government. And that is an insane situation and a shameful one. About Cuba, it's a very necessary change in Cuba. I mean, I cannot, since I was 10 years old, till 11 years old, till I was 22, I lived in a dictatorship in Uruguay. And I imagine myself still living in a dictatorship. It has no sense. It has, all my opportunities, all what you can do in life is determined by your lack of freedom, and you became just an opportunist in the traffic of influences of a regime, and that it has no sense in the life of a person. Nobody can live that life. It's shameful for that person. It's as shameful as being Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Venezuelan regime. It's very hard to ask the Cuban people to do more than the international community, and it's valid also for the Venezuelan regime. You are completely oppressed, block by block, socially oppressed, politically oppressed, economically oppressed. You have serious challenges in the life of every person, every moment. And you ask those people to change this very oppressive regime that can kill you if they want, they can torture you if they want, they can take you to prison, and then they can free you, and then they can take you back to prison. And you ask the people to do that. It's not fair to ask that to the people. But the international community should be more responsible, and this region, this hemisphere, is supposed to be a community for democracies, a community of democracies. So we should engage, and we should definitely put much more pressure than what we are putting on. But if we have if you find leadership that they have a great speech related to the Cartel de los Soles, what do you expect? It's very difficult to have. You need this to be strong in determination and principled determination of governments and the people of the region. And yes, and a change will come. And a change will come. But it has to be helped a lot. It has to be assisted. And it has to be worked together.
Thank you. Concluding question? And again, we'll stick around a few minutes afterwards if you have other questions you want to ask each one of them. Go for it.
Presidente Felipe Calder, quería preguntarle, bueno, me presento, me llamo Joshua Fernando, soy estudiante de la Universidad de NYU y le quería preguntar qué implicaciones concretas podría tener la reforma iniciando en septiembre en los arbitrajes internacionales y la percepción de México como destino de inversión. ¿Cuál es la consecuencia de esta nueva reforma para todas estas personas que están buscando invertir en México? ¿Cuál es la visión que van a tener de México precisamente de esa nueva reforma? Quiero saber su opinión.
Well, definitely, the reform to the judicial branch is the worst notice for any investment because it provokes an endless uncertainty about the future. As I say, the consequences with judicial integrated with judges and ministers, magistrates that not all of them, probably not the majority, are experts in law. You don't know how honest they will be. Actually, there are some, at least when they were candidates, I don't know what happened at the very end, but there are several candidates that are lawyers of narco traffickers, lawyers of El Chapo, lawyers of Zeta 40, which is, maybe they are now the judges. What they have in common is they just will obey any direction, any instruction from the government. That's the common denominator. So if there is against the interest of the government one specific investment, one specific company, one specific decision, no one citizen, no one company, either national or international, will have the right and the chances to ask successfully the protection of the law. So there is no more rule of law in the country. And the investors are already realizing that. The foreign direct investment in Mexico in net terms, despite the reinvestment of profits and others, is becoming negative. So there is more money going out from Mexico than coming to Mexico. And I would say that it is like, I'm switch to Spanish, es una información, what is the expression? In the sense that Mexican people, the locals, could have more information than the foreigners. So the foreigners are trying to invest, and the Mexican money is flowing out, no? Información asimétrica. Yes, indeed, asymmetric information. And that's a quite interesting phenomenon. That is happening, and that is going to happen. For a lot of people, they say, well, the reform is already done, the new judges are arriving, nothing is happening. The metaphor I like to use is, well, the point is, if you have a car, it's a beautiful one, running at like at 200 kilometers per hour, whatever. When you are in a highway without traffic, it's a fantastic car, no problem. What is the problem? Well, the small problem they have is that car has no brakes. Well, it's looking a great car, fancy, beautiful, very fast. But suddenly, whenever you will need the brakes, you will die. So, and probably if you are planning to invest in Mexico for not only 1 year or 3 weeks in CETES, you are planning to establish a facility in energy. Forget energy, the government, the past government, the current, went all the way back to the populist idea that only the government can produce energy, or only the government should produce energy, at least in a majority way, which is no sense in economic terms, no sense in the global arena. It created an incredible bottleneck for production and for consumers of electricity. So if the government has a different idea from your own investment, as Minister Ito say, the money is very coward, you say. Yes, if I have no guarantees on law, I have no judges now, neither in the future, about the protection of my investment, I won't invest in Mexico. That will increase, by the way, mediation and alternative ways of fixing controversies. So probably one of the future for Mexico will be the arbitrage, or arbitraje, I don't know what is exactly the translation for that sense. And mediation will be much more attractive for any investors than the judges and ministers itself. So they're, in brief, in my opinion, the rule of law has been destroyed. It's not clear that there will be guarantees for anyone, no for citizens, no for businesses, let alone for oppositors. It's not good.
Thank you. Now you see how you're going to have a great time over the next 8 weeks with these amazing public servants. And before we conclude, and this one really 1 minute or less, if I can ask each one of you this parting thought. And I always conclude these sessions with this question because politics nowadays has a bad name. You turn on the news and you see what happened today, you see all the negativity, you see the bitterness, you see how one side doesn't get along with the other one, you hear about politicians being corrupt and the worst of the worst. Yet I do think that the best way to make a difference is through public service. You can be a great citizen by being a great doctor, lawyer, teacher, husband, wife, but when you're a public servant, you can do it at a greater scale. You can make a huge difference. But because of all the negativity, all the partisanship that we hear about in the news, many young people decide not to enter politics. They decide to go to the private sector, and why bother if you're going to be trashed in the media, if you're going to be subjected to the things that many of you have been subjected to as public servants. So if in 1 minute or less, hopefully even less, if you can tell us why you should enter public service, why dedicate your life to a career in public service. And I'll begin with Sara.
Well, it's a fantastic question, and I think, you know, if we expect our elected officials and our country to lead us in the right direction, we have the responsibility to contribute to that. And I think it's important for us to encourage public service because there are so many people that can contribute to the improvement of that political dialogue, and it is an important role to be played. So I encourage it. It is not an easy place to be, but we are certainly a better country and certainly a better world when people participate in the process through public service, through voting, through contributing in that way. So that's my quick answer.
Thank you, Sara. Jan?
So I sometimes think, you know, what can I do to improve a situation? Don't think that I can change the world entirely, but I think us as human beings cannot be ignorant of what is happening around us in our communities around the world. And we all cannot do everything, and we cannot help everybody, but I think if we all do our part then a little bit, I think the world will be slightly a better place. It has to be, because that's what's going to be tomorrow and in the future. So that is my internal motivation. Everybody has a different motivation. I think people in the private sector can also make a significant change, but you cannot have private sector without the public. I mean, we're in this together. I've said this, but yeah.
That's why I did it. It was about justice. Just how to bring justice to our society, how to bring justice to our community, how to bring justice to people, and sometimes just making them feel better, or resolving their problems, resolving their issues, is something great. And politics have something that is like the most. Even coming from the most humble people, is the most devoted gratitude that can exist. And the most beautiful love that you can receive is coming from politics.
You come from a country, like few others, the Dominican Republic, I think, is one of the other ones, where governments come on the left, on the right, but they get along. There's a sense of bipartisanship, unlike Mexico, unlike the US. Where you can be a politician, a president on the left or on the right. You have a president now on the left, and the previous one was on the right. It's very civil, very, same in the Dominican Republic, right? Very few countries around the world exhibit that level of civility, which hopefully we can replicate here. Mr. President.
Well, what one tale my life is, once we were stolen from a victory we got, electoral fraud by PRI, and I went to my father and said, well, I'm done with politics. It's a stupid thing, no? So people don't care about us, and when people care, they stole our victories on an election. What is the point of this? I'd say, you need to understand one thing. Well, I love, like my son, whatever could happen and whatever could be your decision, but you need to understand several things. First, this is a moral duty. It's not about victories, it's not about power, it's not about office. And second, you need to understand that in this house, my father was a very congruent Catholic. In this house, the commandment of love your neighbor, we understand that like do politics with principles. And do the good for the other means do the common good for all. That's politics.
Right. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Minister, get the last word.
Hay muchas maneras de verlo. Yo prefiero ceñirme a lo que decía nuestro padre fundador, Juan Pablo Duarte, un gran liberal, que la política es la ciencia más noble después de la literatura. Y principalmente si el que decide abrazarla entiende que es una oportunidad para servir. En el mundo, querramos o no, entre los racionales y los irracionales, siempre va a haber una cabeza, alguien que dirija una manada de lobos o una reina en la caja de abejas. Así tiene que haber un presidente, los ministros, los directores, por la propia organización. ¿Qué queremos nosotros? Que se haga con transparencia, con rendición de cuentas, que se ciña a la libertad, a la igualdad, al respeto a la propiedad, al respeto a los valores principales de la familia. Y si no participamos lo que podemos de una u otra manera, ¿a quién se lo dejamos? A que lo dirija otro, que no tenga la misma visión y que haga todo lo contrario. Modelos tenemos muchos. Quizás pudiéramos añorar lo que pasa en Suiza, que si usted le pregunta a un ciudadano o a cualquiera de nosotros, me atrevería de preguntarle quién es el presidente o quién es un senador, nadie sabe, te habla de un tenista, de un reloj, de un queso, más que de la política. Pero resulta que hay que ocuparse, y hay que ocuparse para asegurarnos de que las cosas se den bien. Así que mirarla como una ciencia noble, un ejercicio y una oportunidad para servir.
Okay, Luis, thank you so very much. Our next event is going to be this Friday, where we're going to launch our new edition of the Index of Bureaucracy. And following that, in a week and a half, we're going to have a series. Many of you won't be able to attend, although you're all welcome to. This will be in New York City, where we're going to host at least 5 presidents, current presidents. We're waiting for 2 more, so it might be up to 7. We're going to have breakfasts, lunches, and dinners with between 5 and 7 sitting presidents of different countries from around the world, most of them Latin America, but we have one from Africa as well. So stay tuned to our emails so you can learn about these events. We have many more planned for you here in New York City, in the Dominican Republic, and hopefully the Czech Republic soon. But thank you so very much. We'll stick around for a few moments. And again, please take advantage of this amazing opportunity to learn firsthand from these amazing public servants. Thank you.